Hello, Prof. We are going to talk about the impact of underestimation or overestimation of exchange rate policy on economic progress. We divide it into 5 parts, and first of all, I will give you a brief introduction. Firstly, I will introduce the RMB exchange rate. Since the reform and opening up, China's export-oriented economy has made great achievements, and the degree of China's economic opening to the outside world has increased significantly in terms of the ratio of imports and exports to GDP. And next, I will introduce the floating RMB exchange rate. With the continuous increase of China's opening to the outside world, the issue of the RMB exchange rate has increasingly become the focus of attention in academic and political circles at home and abroad. Therefore, analyzing the impact of RMB's real exchange rate misalignment on China's economic growth is undoubtedly of great value for evaluating the gains and losses of the RMB exchange rate policy over the past 10 years. And last, I will introduce the exchange rate misalignment. When the actual real exchange rate level deviates, it is inconsistent with the estimated equilibrium real exchange rate. Real exchange rate imbalance occurs. The impact of real exchange rate misalignment on economic growth is further divided into overweight and underestimated economic growth effects. But from the existing research results, no consistent conclusion has been reached. And now let's move to the theory mechanism.
Let's look at the theory mechanism. As present, most of the empirical research results show that real exchange rate underestimation can promote economic growth. The transmission mechanism of real exchange rate balance affecting economic growth can be summarized into 4 categories. First, the current account mechanism. The underestimation of the real exchange rate is conducive to enhancing the external competitiveness of a country's export sector, and it will increase the import cost of a country, leading to domestic product replacing import and export growth, therefore reducing import demand. Second, the capital accumulation mechanism. Real exchange rate underestimating increases domestic investment by increasing corporate profits and promotes foreign direct investment by reducing the investment cost of foreign capital, which is conducive to domestic capital accumulation and promotes domestic economic growth. Next, the total factor productivity improvement mechanism. The underestimation of the real exchange rate can guide production resources from the non-tradable goods sector to the manufacturing sector, and the manufacturing industry has a faster rate of productivity growth. At last, the suboptimal adjustment mechanism. The suboptimal adjustment mechanism is to promote the development of the tradable sector by improving the efficiency of resources allocation promotes the development of the tradable sector and the non-tradable sector to promote economic growth. Next, part 3.
Well, let's look at the economic growth effect of RMB exchange rate misalignment. It includes overestimation and underestimation. First, let's look at the overestimation. In the short term, the underestimation of the real exchange rate may have a positive effect on economic growth, and a longer period and a greater degree of exchange rate underestimate valuation may have a negative effect on economic growth. And second, let's look at the overestimation of the real exchange rate. The most direct impact is the decline in the external competitiveness of exporting companies, which ultimately leads to a substantial contraction of the domestic export sectors. And under certain conditions, The overvaluation of the real exchange rate can promote economic growth. For example, under the condition of low domestic exports, exchange rate overvaluation promotes the improvement of domestic production capacity by lowering the price of important capital goods and the technology and other production factors, which is an important substitution strategy. Okay, next part.
Okay. Next, we will be talking on the analysis of renminbi real exchange rate misalignment. So this graph shows the long-term imbalance of renminbi real exchange rate from Q1 of 1994 to Q4 of 2015. From the graph, we will see there's a series of undervaluation and overvaluation in the 20 years investigated. Next, the first period of undervaluation is started from the first quarter of 1994 to the fourth quarter of 1995. In the early 1990s, China's market economy system has gradually improved. The financial market continued to rise and receive a lot of investment. The import of high-tech products increased significantly, which requires the use of foreign exchange. So it was in short supply of foreign exchange. And then after the reform of renminbi exchange regime, the merging of official exchange rate and the foreign exchange adjustment market rate has led to a serious gap. Next, the overvaluation from first quarter of 1996 to third quarter of 1998. After the financial crisis in Asia, many of the China's trading partners devalued against the USD. But the Chinese government insists on not devaluing the renminbi. They adopted a policy of stabilization of renminbi, which increased the nominal exchange rate of renminbi. Subsequently, the undervaluation from fourth quarter of 1998 to the third quarter of 2000. The renminbi was overvalued in this period. Next, the undervaluation of third quarter of 2009 until the first quarter of 2012. China has implemented a large-scale economic stimulus plan, so the economy has rebounded steadily. At the same time, the European debt crisis and the various QE in the advanced economy weakened major currencies. Next, for the first quarter of 2013 until the fourth quarter of 2014, there is an overvaluation of renminbi. This is due to the QE policy in the European and the American countries. It has pressured the renminbi to appreciate. The additional issuance of renminbi has declined the purchasing power of renminbi. So next part will be presented by Wushasha.
In part 5, it drives conclusion and suggestions. There are three main conclusions of RMB. From the first quarter of 1994 to the first quarter of 2014, the real exchange rate of the RMB showed a trend of alternating overvaluation and undervaluation. The second is a long-term renminbi real exchange rate imbalance will adversely affect China's economic growth. The third one is the negative impact of the real exchange rate imbalance on economic growth is more obvious after exchange rate reform. And the suggestion contains two parts. One part is the purpose of promoting economic growth is achieved through appropriate currency underestimation. Another part is implement reasonable monetary and fiscal policies consistent with the exchange rate systems, and the suggestion for the real exchange rate of RMB. An undervaluation of the RMB's real exchange rate is conducive to economic growth, while an overvaluation of the real exchange rate hinders economic growth. And in the future, the central bank will exchange more reasonable opportunities to increase the exchange rate fluctuation range, thereby enhance the flexibility of the RMB exchange rate so that the actual equilibrium exchange rate can be maintained with the fluctuation range after fluctuations. That's all. Thank you.